It is my pleasure, as always, to introduce to you to Ann Lovejoy, who is an author, a columnist, a musician, and a exceptional gardener. And she is here to answer our questions today about winter gardening. So welcome, Ann.
Thanks, Karen. It's always so much fun to get together with everybody. Um, Earlier, Megan was asking about, is anybody growing anything? And I wanted to say, yeah, this is really one of the amazing parts of the country where we can keep growing quite a bit of stuff all year round. Um, I always grow greens through the winter, especially things like kale and chard, which are a little bit tougher than just plain lettuce. But there are like four seasons lettuces too, quite a lot of winter lettuces. And they're called things like winter density or marvel of the four seasons. That gives you the clue that they're going to be able to keep growing through winter. You can put them under a cloche or in a little cold frame. Like last time we talked a little bit about cold frames. And that way the slightly more tender greens don't get as bitter. They can start to bitter up when they get really cold nights down in the 30s. But as long as things stay pretty much in the 40s or the high 30s, we're fine, and we can really be harvesting quite a lot of things right clear through. In fact, some years I've been picking tomatoes at Thanksgiving, but not this year because we had those few cold dips. But there's lots of different kinds of kale. About at least 60 or 70 varieties of kale to try out. If you think you don't like it, you should just try another kind. And they're really sweet now because we've had a couple of nippy frosts. And what happens is when things get that cold, their starches start to convert to sugars. And that's that's what makes Brussels sprouts taste a whole lot better too. Like they can taste really cabbagey up until about now. And then if you start picking them now, you'll get a sweetness that comes through too. It's really nice. And of course, kale and all the different kinds of chards, they're going to have that extra little sweetness too. And endive, if you're still growing any of those, like chicories, they balance their bitter with sweet right about now, and they're perfect. If you grow those, you can cut them in half lengthwise and grill them or saute them or even put them in the oven, and they'll be this perfect balance of kind of tart, bitter, and a little caramelized sweetness. Really good. So there's that. You can also leave potatoes in the ground until, you can harvest them little by little if you want to. If you don't have a good place to store them, I do usually keep them in the ground. And I'm still digging up potatoes, some purple ones, some of those funky little fingerling potatoes that come from Lake Ozette. They're called, surprise, Ozette potatoes. And they're, about the size of your finger, a little bit fatter. And they're really delicious. The flavor is amazing, but they're lumpy and bumpy and they look really odd. And people usually think there's something wrong with them. But they were actually brought up to this part of the country by the Spanish conquistadors back in the 1600s. And they had a camp out at Lake Ozette. And they were there for 2 or 3 years. And then they decided the weather was horrible and they didn't like anything about the Northwest and they left. But they left a crop of potatoes in the ground. And so the Macaw people who have lived out there for millennia, they kept the potatoes and kept them going. And they've been growing them ever since. And about, 10 or 15 years ago, some foodies who were looking for cool, interesting traditional crops kind of stumbled over the Macaw potatoes and realized that what they were and kind of traced their history, which is pretty cool. But you can buy those in the grocery store, and as long as they're organic, you'll be able to sprout them and grow them on your own self. But I wouldn't put them in the ground until spring if you're trying to start them from little, eye buds. But you can harvest them still, right? My grandkids love to take a little spade out in the back, and we've marked off some places and they carefully dig up, and then it's like a treasure box, they said, because you dig up the dirt and here come a whole tumble of potatoes too. Pretty sweet.
Hey, Ian, I have a question about kale. Ours are kind of getting long and bushy at the top. Should I pinch off some of the top ones to kind of force them down like we do other plants, or?
Well, it doesn't with kale. Sometimes you can get that to work, and some types do that pretty well. The dragon skin kales or the Tuscan black kales, the crinkly ones, they're not so good about that. So no, not really. What you can do is let a couple of them go to seed. And if they flower and go to seed, which they still will do even in the middle of winter, then you can gather seed from them and grow them on. But other kinds of kale, some of the ones like the Scottish kale, the Russian kales, the big Portuguese kale that looks like porcelain, the big white creamy leaves, those you can actually usually cut back to about a couple inches and they'll start sprouting again from the base. And the perennial kales like cosmic kale, which is a cross between several different species, that one you can do tip cuttings right about now. And because it will bush out and have many arms. And like you said, it starts to drop all the lower leaves and it just has these clusters on the top. If you pinch those and stick them in the ground, many of them will root. Last year when I did that, I stuck in about 15 or 20 and every single one rooted, which I didn't actually intend, but I shared them around. You don't always get that kind of luck, but yeah, you can certainly do that. And that perennial kale usually lasts about 3 to 5 years and then it kind of peters out. So you just keep it going with little cuttings like that. But this is a great time. Hey, Christina. This is a great time to do cuttings of a lot of different things. You wouldn't necessarily think that, but for hydrangeas, for things like rosemary, for some of the woody shrubs that you might want to have more of, this is a really good time. You take a stick, 5 or 6 inches long, and you want it to be about the thickness of your little finger or a pencil, and not soft and lishy, but not rigid either. And you just strip off the bottom leaves and pinch out the top, stick them in the soil so that at least 2 leaf nodes are submerged without the leaves on them. And then usually you'll get a pretty good percentage of those. Again, sometimes in the middle of winter you get 100%, but usually at least half to 2/3 will sprout.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Any other things about kale? Anybody else have any questions?
One thing I will say is if you're picking kale, you want to really rinse it well because one of the worst pests on kale are snails. And none of the snails we have here are native to this area, except our only native snails in this part of the world are actually water dwellers. So all the ground dwelling snails that we have, most of them come up from California or have come in on commercial crops of plants and stuff. But the little ones just hide in the crinkles of the foliage of those kale. And sometimes when I'm washing the kale, I'll get like 6 or 8 little, I mean, they're cute, sort of, kind of, but not really. But if you don't want, and of course, protein and calcium, if you crunched a few down, it wouldn't kill you. But generally speaking, I prefer my greens without the addition of slugs and snails.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if we get a deep frost, that will kill them off. But there's still the eggs in the soil, so we'll still get a resurgence of them in spring.
Right. Yep. Keep that beer close by. Keep it in the pantry with the little cups.
Right? It doesn't even have to be bubbly. It can be flat. It's not, because for them, it's not the effervescence that's attractive. It's the smell of the barley, the fermentation. That's what they're looking for.
And it's St. Pauli girl, like a dark.
Dark. Yeah.
Okay. Noted.
Cheapest stuff you can get, right? You have to go to a Little Apple or something to find it, I think. I've been also looking at a lot of the gardens around town and our big garden at the library. And of course, all the camellias are coming out now. Even some of the ones that usually bloom in April are blooming now because they get confused when we have, weird summers like we did and periods of drought and then rain, some cool dips, and then it warms up again. Plants don't know exactly what to make of it. So that's why we're getting some odd early bloom on some plants that should typically be waiting until spring. But there's also a whole lot of winter blooming camellias, all the sasanquas, and they typically bloom from November into March. And that's what they're doing now. And they generally have smaller flowers. But like my favorite is called Yuletide, and it has brilliant red blossoms with golden fringe around their centers. And they're just so cheerful and pretty, and they bloom like crazy. So that's a really good one. And they're small. They get maybe 8 feet. So they're great for even a patio. You can have them in a big container, or on a deck if you have good support. But you don't need a ton of room for them, because some of the big camellias can get 15 or 20 feet high and wide, and that is a lot of space to give up to one plant. if your garden is small.
Yes. A lot
I've
of us
also
have
found,
patios. Yeah.
sorry?
A lot of us just have patios. So.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the coolest things about the patios trend is that it's been popular long enough that the hybridizers are starting to do a lot of work on developing smaller scale plants of many, many kinds, like raspberries and blueberries, as well as ornamental stuff, like little hydrangeas that will stay 2 to 3 feet and aren't going to try to get 6 feet high or 10 feet high, which is great because that's what you really want for longevity, for sustainability, is a plant that's not desperately trying to outgrow its position all the time. So it's pretty sweet. You can, most of the local nurseries do carry quite a bit of that kind of container plant stuff, but you can also look online. There's some wonderful resources like One Green World. I don't know if any of you have discovered that one yet, but it's a wonderful regional nursery that has all kinds of great edibles. And like Karen, they like to tell the story of where this plant came from. They tell its history, what it's been used for. I love stuff like that.
Ooh, One Green World. That's
Yeah.
I'm looking that one up right now.
Maybe you can put it in the chat if you can find it. I never can figure out how to do that.
Very good.
Yeah. I was up at the library and a lot of the roses are still blooming. And it's sort of funny because people think of roses as a summer flower, and of course they are, but there are many spring blooming roses that will start blooming in April or May, like the Banks roses. But then there's others that just keep puttering along indefinitely. And a lot of that is owed to these Chinese roses. Rosa chinensis is one of the quintessential year-round roses, and it used to be called the monthly rose because you could pretty much guaranteed you'd find a blossom or two any month of the year. And we have a big one up at the library, and sure enough, it's still putting out buds and blossoms. And quite a few of the more recent hybrids that are long repeat bloomers like that had been crossed over time with that Rosa chinensis and some of its offspring to get that longevity gene in there, which is kind of sweet. I love going out at, for many years, I would make a Christmas tussy mussy and find all the things I could find on Christmas morning. When I lived on Capitol Hill, I remember it was kind of mild over there too. And I'd get maybe 15 or 20 different things, just one or two of each maybe, or just, a nice bud. But it made me really feel hopeful because, the days are closing in and the nights are getting longer. You really kind of want the feeling that there is hope in the future, and seeing the buds on things, seeing that sort of the last rose, cheerfully puttering along. I love that.
Yes.
We still have a lot of hummingbirds in our neighborhood, and partly it's because many of us are growing hardy fuchsias, and they can get pretty good size, but they keep blooming well into winter on a year like this. Almost all of them still have blossoms on them, and they get bzz, bzz, bzz. We see the little visitors coming, but also pineapple sage. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with that herb. I picked a couple of them. If you can see that. And it has these long arms. This pot one has been in a pot probably 5 years old now. And it is about 4 feet high and about 6 feet wide because it's really big. And it's still covered with blooms. And on a warm day, you'll see hummingbirds there all day long. I love that.
Yes. One thing that Bob and we take a walk. We try to get out and walk every day, rain or shine. And one thing we've seen is the amazing amount of different colored berries.
Yes.
Blue and purple and white and red and orange and yellow. I mean, they're everywhere. And we've never really noticed them until pandemic. And we're out crawling the neighborhoods that have very few people out and looking around and into the woods. And I'm just amazed.
Yeah, if you look up at the library, just in the parking lot of the library, as you pull in, you'll see there's a really beautiful crabapple tree that we planted in memory of one of our dear members. And it's a Washington Centennial crab. And it's been in the ground about 15 years. So it's mature, and it's about 8 feet high, maybe 9, and about 10, 12 feet wide, maybe. But it is covered with beautiful little crab apples. And it's interesting to me that the birds don't eat them until they ferment. And then they do. And then you can see them getting a little tipsy. they'll eat them and then kind of, whoa, dude, and be wandering around. And, but they're really cute. And then next to that, there's a really beautiful smaller crabapple called Golden Raindrops. And it has beautiful yellow, tiny, almost berry-like crabapples right now. And we have another orange one on the other side. And there's also an American beauty bush. As you pull in and turn to go up to where the book drop is, you'll see on the right, there is a bush that's studded with tiny purple berries. And it's covered with them right now. And they're about the size of a pinhead, but there's so many of them, they really show up beautifully. And those are, Beautyberry is native to the American southeast and out actually into Missouri, so south up to the southwest. And there's another species there's several more species in China and Japan. And a lot of those have been crossed to get really beautiful color combinations. You can get pink ones. There's one called Mother of Pearl that's almost opalescent. But I really love the purple ones because they're just so cheerful in the wintertime. And one of the cool things about Beautyberry is that it's a natural pesticide for ticks and for black fly and for mosquitoes. And native people use them for, of course, thousands of years, and crush the leaves and rub it on your skin where it's exposed, and you won't get bitten by anything, which is pretty great. And when the settlers came, they would cut branches and put them over their horses to keep the black fly off, because black flies will bite a horse and make them buck or misbehave. And this little plant, it turns out, now there's been quite a bit of scientific research on it, and it turns out it's more effective than DEET and far less toxic. So I suspect in years to come, we'll be seeing, Beautyberry extracts instead of some of these horrible things that people put on their bodies to try to keep the bugs away.
Wow, that is fascinating. I've never heard that. It's like, so, and they're purple and beautiful. And can I crush them and put them on my skin? No.
No, it's not the berries. It's the foliage, which of course isn't there right now.
Okay.
Yeah. No. But the bugs aren't there right now either, so you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What's the plant we're talking about, Ann?
It's called Beautyberry or Calicarpa, which means beautiful berry in Greek. So yeah, Calicarpa americana is the native one, and then there's some different species. There's a Korean one and a Chinese one, and so forth. And they're all easy to grow. The thing that's funny is they don't look like much, and the flowers are so tiny that it can be in full bloom and you would never even know it. But when those berries come out, that's the real showboat time. And the fall color's really spectacular on some of them too, so that you get these great, beautiful leaves that are pink and purple and rose and copper and bronze and salmon and peach with all the purple berries shining through. And that's really, for me, that's the like high moment of it. But a lot of people don't even notice it, as you say, Karen. When people are walking, especially if they have their earbuds on, they don't really look. And I always want to say, you can listen to music anytime. Take those things off your head and listen to the birds and look around and look at the plants around you. It's, we're missed so much by being wrapped up, by carrying our world with us everywhere we go. We kind of miss out on what's going on in the natural world.
Can the Beautyberry be done on my patio?
Can you, if you had like a half whiskey barrel sized container, you could grow one. Maybe not indefinite. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the American ones are smaller, but they're still going to be like 4 or 5 feet.
Oh.
But Sheila, there's the one at the library. You can use that.
All right. I'll come up and use that. Thank you. So if you discovered that there are some leaves are gone, that's what's happened.
Yeah, look, Karen's showing a picture.
Oh, look.
I love
that. That's beautiful.
So here's the thing: if you locate it now when the berries are there but the leaves are not, but next summer when the leaves are there but the berries are not, you'll still know where it is and which one it is. So and I don't mind it a bit if people help themselves to a few leaves, no problem. We actually have a couple. We have an American one and a hybrid one.
I just was on my walk around the boardwalk and saw Henrietta, those of you who know about what I'm talking about. Anyway, she was there definitely. And we talked a bit. Anyway, and then I introduced her to another person. Anyway, Daphne, the Daphne down there by the pub is growing like crazy. And I get so thrilled because that's the most beautiful smell in the world.
Uh-huh.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. There are quite a few Daphnes, and some of them are winter blooming. Daphne balua is winter blooming, and some of them are not too big for a container either. Some of them are actually pretty little. There's a rock garden version that's really quite small that you could put in a window box even. So you can have that fragrance. So most of them are spring and summer bloomers, but there are a couple that will bloom at late or early.
These the ones that I'm talking about, this is the second go round of these.
Yeah.
I mean, they were there in the summer or spring and summer, and now this is the second blooming on the same group, on the same plant.
Yep, the ones at Eagle Harbor Church are also blooming a little bit right now. They're on the east side, and there's a variegated one, and it's kind of sported its non-variegated part too. So, and some of those are still in bloom or fitfully blooming. A lot of things here in the Northwest will bloom, I call it fitfully, off and on through the year, and you'll get what seems like unseasonal bloom pretty much any time. And you can see primroses starting to bloom right now all over the place because they don't know what time it is. As far as they're concerned, if they can wake up and not be frozen to the core, they're going to just do it. So that's a kind of fun little glimpse ahead too. One thing I noticed when I was down at Eagle Harbor Church was that there are two olive trees that are full of olives this year. Their berries are not particularly large because the hardiest olives don't have the biggest fruit, but they're loaded abundantly. Here in this part of the Northwest, they don't, unless we have a really hot summer, they won't really ripen up all that well. So they're still green, but you can pickle them. You can put them in brine. I've done that several times, and they make nice little nibbles when they're done. And they're self-fruitful, so they don't really need a partner, though they do seem to do a little bit better if they have one. But it's kind of neat that, down the road, the olives are kind of moving north. The growers are starting to try them in Oregon and discovering that they didn't used to be considered hardy in Oregon, but now quite a few of them are. So I suspect we'll be looking down the road at olive oil that's sourced from artisanal farms in Oregon too, and maybe at some point Washington, who knows? The way we're headed.
Yeah, it looks like that's what's happening. Wine country's moving north, olives, everything's moving north. So are a lot of people.
Yeah, true story. And
Yep.
who can blame them?
I can't. So, yeah.
I wanted to show you one thing. I was kind of pleased. So at my Amaryllis, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's got a second bud blossom coming up. And I always, when I buy an Amaryllis in a box, I always weigh them. I pick them all up, and you can even weigh them on the scales. Take a bunch over that seem heavy to you and put them on the fruit scales and pick the very heaviest one, and it will almost always have 2, and sometimes it will have 3 flower head buds in it because the buds are already fully formed inside that bulb. So, but feeding it isn't going to help you this year. But when you do get one like that, if you do feed it once a month with a mild house plant fertilizer, then you'll get more leaves. And generally speaking, you get 1 bloom spike for every 5 foliage, just leaves. So if you can get it to put on 10 or 12 or more leaves, like growing it like a house plant after the blossom is gone, then the next year it will give you another set of blossoms, which is kind of fun. But yeah, people look at you funny when you carry the boxes over to the bananas and start weighing them, but that's the way to make sure you get the very best of the bunch.
Hey, but if they see you doing it, everybody will start. They go, oh, it's Ann. We're going to do it too.
But if you have your mask on, they're like, what is that weird woman doing?
Oh, love it.
This morning, we were having a little community project. We have giant tree roots infiltrating the asphalt around our mailboxes, and people were tripping. So we cut it, and now we're all prying it up and carting it away. And asphalt is recyclable, which is kind of wonderful. So we're stacking it up on the side so that when the pavers come through, they'll take away the old stuff as well as bringing in the new. But one of the things I noticed was that the what used to be called schizostylus and is called now Hesper aloe or river lily, they were all blooming like crazy. So I brought one, and you can see, I hope.
Oh.
Isn't that pretty? And there's a lot of these. This one's called Oregon Sunset. They're actually South African, but they grow so beautifully in the Pacific Northwest that we have quite a few hybrids of different colors for here, but that's one of my favorite colors. They come in white or soft pink, even a little bit of a lavenderish kind of one, but it's those red and rose ones that I think are the jolliest. And one is called Christmas Cheer, which I used to have, and it's much redder than that. But those are fun winter bloomers too. They really don't, they're a little ratty looking, let's just say. So they're good for the back of a border. They're not necessarily the best for the front line, but where we were prying up the asphalt, they're kind of leaning over the curb. And I just thought it was so fun to have these beautiful flowers as we grunted and groaned.
They were encouraging you to keep going.
They were. And I also have my my seasonal holiday cactus. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So this is what this bloomed about a month ago, and I fed it, and now it's blooming even more. And that's one thing to remember, that a lot of plants, do need to eat, and we kind of forget that they're captive in a pot. They can't feed themselves very well. So I think I mentioned last time I wash the leaves about once a month, and I just rinse them off so they don't get all dusty, and then they do a whole lot better. But also remembering to feed them maybe like on the last Sunday of the month or something like that. You'll get much better performance out of some of those long bloomers like that.
Yeah.
I have a I don't know, it's a cactus. Okay, it's like that. Christmas or Easter crab, whichever it is, and I've never had flowers, ever.
Well, try feeding it and try giving it a little more light. It doesn't like direct light, but it likes indirect light. So,
Right. Mine's off to the side a little bit.
Might want more light. It might also want a bigger pot, because usually if plants don't bloom, it's because they can't afford to. They don't have enough reserves. So flowers are icing on the cake, right? Survival is just leaves. But if they want to bloom for you, they need a little extra help.
And then a little miracle grow on the side once a month.
Yeah, and you can make sure that you water it first, because you don't want to put fertilizer in. Wait, what?
Are you talking?
I was going to ask, I have a question.
Mickey.
What kind of, do you use Miracle Grow on all your plants, or do you have a specific kind you use like on your Christmas cactus? And what makes them sturdier? Mine bloom, but they don't feel sturdy in the box, in the planter.
Yeah, if they're getting kind of limp, a succulent, of course, is made to hold water, and that cactus is a kind of succulent, a zygocactus, and of course, cactuses are famous for holding water too, right? So if they're limp, they're not able to hold enough water, so they're probably needing a little fertilizer, and they may also have exhausted the soil in their pot. Lots of times, if we put them in a pot and we forget about them. My friend recently asked me to look at this one she had that was her mom's, and she'd had it for 15 years and it wasn't doing anything, and she'd never, ever, ever repotted it. And it's like, it's not actually an air plant. It really does need some nutrients, and soil, especially potting soil, can get exhausted fairly quickly. So a good thing to do with those is to, in the summertime when they're off duty, just gently unpot them, shake out the roots off, and there's not very much root growth if the soil is exhausted, and then repot them in a little bit bigger pot with fresh potting soil. And you don't want to use garden soil. You really want to use potting soil for indoors, because our garden soils are heavy, and that often will lead them to rot instead of grow happily. But giving them a little boost is always helpful, right? Either it's, if the soil is fairly fresh, like no more than 1 or 2 years, then try just feeding them once a month. But if they've been in that pot for quite a while, then it might be time to give everybody a fresh bed, right? That's their.
Will they bloom the following? Will they bloom the following?
Oh, they're not truly tied to our holidays. The cactuses do not observe Christian holidays particularly, so they will bloom when they're fed properly, and they'll bloom when light conditions suit them, and they'll bloom after you've changed their bed and given them something to eat. Plants really are more about, they're opportunists for the most part. Some
But
of
we
the
need-
plants are very specific. They're like lilacs are only going to bloom when day length is going to get to a certain point. So they're day length sensitive. But most of our houseplants are really just sensitive to environmental conditions. Does that make sense? Like,
So I need to wait
Mhm.
until
Yes.
summertime to take this and put new soil with it, right?
usually there's kind of this period between about the middle of December and the middle of January when most plants are not really doing a whole lot. We do outside, you'll get some root growth, but that's not the best time to divide things. But by the middle of January, that's a good time. You could do it.
Mm.
And the other thing is indoor plants are not so keyed to that schedule. So indoor plants, if they look crap, then that's the good time to go help them out. Right?
Right. How many different colors of Christmas cactus are there?
Oh gosh, there must
I've
be
seen four.
15 or 20. No, there's lots. So there are collectors,
Wow.
of course. There are collectors who have every conceivable shade and are breeding for more of them.
Wow.
I have a group of friends called Plant Geeks, and they're all actively hybridizing anything that they are fond of, which is fun. You get really interesting effects. But, to the eye of the beloved collector, the differences in shade are very slight to me, but to them, they're, really significant. So they might have a dozen plants that they think are all quite different. And I would be inclined to say they were pretty much the same thing. So it kind of depends, but clear different colors, at least 5 or 6 and maybe more.
Wow.
And is this a good time to prune hydrangeas and lilacs, perennials?
Yes. Well, it's a good time to, perennials you can cut back to where you start to see the buds should already be poking up for many perennials. And you can cut them back to within a few inches. If they're tender perennials, something like the pineapple sage, I really let them wait until like winter's going to kill off the tops. Let them kill the tops, and then the bottom will be protected by that top growth.
Right.
And then you can trim those in the middle of February, say. Hydrangeas you can do now, remembering that most of them bloom on old growth. So you don't want to, if you cut really hard into old growth, you won't really get any, well, you know that. You won't get any flowers
Right.
next year. But yeah, you can take them back to just above a set of developing buds and cut at a slant so the rain will kind of roll off and tidy them up, kind of give them more or less a unified, a symmetrical shape. This is a great time to do that. Lilacs are a little different because most of the lilacs are really trees and they start getting taller and taller and taller, and they're meant to be 15, 18, 20 feet high. And that's their natural, that's what they're going to do by nature, right? That's their natural form. So if we keep cutting them back, you start to get really bushy, twiggy, smaller blooms, and they don't, they often are bloom every other year for the most part, or they'll bloom heavily one year and very lightly the next year. And there are ways to get around that, but only if they're allowed to have their normal shape. So one thing, there's a number of lilacs that have been bred with some of the Korean lilacs that are natural dwarfs, and you can get smaller lilacs. I've heard that there's some bred to be container grown, but I've also heard that they don't really reliably bloom. Like they do okay the first year, but most of the time they peter out in 2 or 3 years. So they're not reliable yet. But like Miss Kim is a natural dwarf lilac that will stay small. Like Sheila, you could have that on your deck if you wanted to in a half barrel, and it would be happy forever and smell.
It gets pretty
The
big.
flowers are small, but really fragrant. Sorry?
We have one, and it's about 6 feet wide. I miss him. It goes 6 by 6.
That may not be a true strain because the true strain ones are usually more like 3 or 4 max. But
really?
there's a lot of hybrids out there, and it can be hard to tell what you have until it suddenly isn't.
Okay.
Like all those beautiful cylindrical golden cypress that are supposed to be Wilma, and Wilma at maturity is going to be like 20 feet high and 1 foot wide, and they're amazing looking. Well, almost all of what's being sold as Wilma is not. And so you plant that thinking it's going to be a nice tall pillar, and they get 6, 8 feet wide and 20 feet high, and it's not at all what you had in mind. So it's a little bit hard to know what you actually are getting sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Nikki, you have your hand up.
Yes, back to the cactus. I want to transplant mine, so if I do that in January, February, do I also feed it at the same time?
No, because great question. The fresh soil is enough for starters. If a plant has been sad and is struggling a little bit, and you're just going to give it fresh soil and a fresh container, that's enough to get it started. But trying to feed it on top of that, it doesn't have the root system to handle that. It's kind of like giving a chemo patient a big steak dinner. That's not really the right approach, right? So you do with the gentle step, let them get established. You'll start to see them perk up, they'll green up. The foliage will get thicker and start to look more succulent like it should. Then you can start feeding it once a month. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
Take it slow at first, yeah. Consider them convalescent when they first get stepped up, right? When they're flopping or fading.
Parts of the plant, I put two together a long time ago, and one of them seems to be a little bit stronger than the other, and I thought maybe I should separate them. I've got pink, and then there's a white, and I intermixed them. Was that not a good idea?
When you take them apart, what you can do is knock them out on take them outside or put them on a porch on a piece of plastic or something, and gently knock the pot out, and then gently I just vibrate them. I don't pull so much, but I just shake and vibrate, and then the soil falls off, and you can usually just vibrate them apart without ripping. And then you'll get more of the intact root system, such as it is. But then you'll be able to tell really quickly if one system is healthy and strong and the other one not so much. Each one needs its own pot, probably. And I don't usually use that same pot again right away. I'll bleach it, wash it and bleach it.
I had a Christmas cactus that someone gave me years ago, and it was not doing well. And I went down to Bay Hay, and they recommended repotting it in cactus soil. And I said, who knew there was such a thing as cactus soil? So I got some and I repotted it in that, and it's been happy as a clam. It's really doing well. So I guess based on that evidence, I would recommend the cactus soil. If anyone needs any, I have a bag.
Yeah, you don't really need to do that, but that cactus soil is also really good for starting seeds in, if you should get inclined to do that at some point, because it's so light and airy.
Well, the other thing that happened there was that I put it into a pot that apparently it was one in which I had a maidenhair fern that died. And I thought I had started with all new soil, but apparently not, because the maidenhair fern came up too. After, a year or so later. And I love the combination of the two of them together. I'm wondering if their needs are sufficiently different that it's going to be a problem in the long run.
Yeah, I would say so. For one thing, maidenhair fern really hates to dry out even for a minute. And you let them dry and they go dormant or they die. And the cactus is designed to have periods of drought, of course. Yeah. So yeah, maybe pot them up and then put them next to each other, but not in the same pot. They can be friends, but they can't be like mothers, right?
But they can't marry. Yeah.
They can't have the same bed.
Well, Ann, thank you so much. And I hope you'll come back next month, because I want to see your Amaryllis.
Sure. Oh, that's a good idea. Do we want to keep going?
Yes.
I do. Your hand if you want to keep going.
Yeah, raise hands.
Thank you.